A crucial moment in Austria's history. A far-right leader is invited to form a government for the first time since World War II. Will Herbert Kickle succeed in striking a coalition deal and provide stable leadership? And what could that mean for immigrants? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Austria could soon join a growing number of European Union countries led by the far right. Months of negotiation led by the conservative Austrian People's Party ended with no coalition. And the president, a left-wing former Greens leader, has been left with little choice but to look even further to the right. The Freedom Party, or FPO, is anti-immigration and pro-Russian. It was founded in the 50s, but won an election for the first time in September with almost a third of the vote. FPO leader Herbert Kickle is due to begin negotiations with the Conservatives. He will be hoping to emerge as the Chancellor. So will he succeed? And if he does, what does the future look like for Austria's ailing economy and its significant immigrant population? We'll address these issues in a moment. First, though, Sonia Gallego has this update from Vienna.
The ball is firmly in the court of the far-right leader of the Freedom Party, Herbert Kickle. Kickle has the task of trying to produce a coalition government with the Conservative People's Party. Now, it had been the job of the People's Party to try and cobble together a coalition with the Social Democrat and another party, another Liberal Party. Those discussions had been in place since the elections in September. But those talks collapsed over the weekend, leaving it up to the task of the Freedom Party to try and bring about that coalition government. However, it was the Freedom Party that won most votes in the election, but the problem was that the other parties refused to enter into coalition talks with the Freedom Party. People that we have been speaking to, some have even welcomed the idea, others are more doubtful about this prospect.
I find the whole situation a bit dubious, no matter which party comes to power, so we'll have to see where it takes the country.
It is worrying, especially for people with disabilities. It will take us backwards. There will be no more inclusion. The Freedom Party and People's Party want to cut budgets for social services. It will take us back.
There are far-right politicians in lots of countries, Italy for example, and other places too. Politics is always changing and Austria needs something new. That's what I think.
There are questions over how stable a government with the far-right Freedom Party would be. Of course, this wouldn't be the first time that they would be in a governing coalition, but it would be the first time since World War II that a far-right presence would be leading a government. And for people who have grave reservations about this, especially around issues like immigration, well, Herbert Kickle has certainly made his views known about this. He has proposed policies such as remigration and preventing people from bringing family members over from their countries of origin, and also bringing about this idea of Fortress Austria, an idea that he shares also with other nationalist populist leaders in Europe, such as Viktor Orban, a man who he is closely aligned with, certainly in politics and certainly of the issue of immigration. Sonia Gallego, Vienna, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. In Vienna, Bonvalot is a journalist and author of a book about the FPO. In Bath, in the UK, Aurelien Mondon is a senior lecturer at the University of Bath who researches extremism and racism in Europe. Also in Vienna, Florian Hartleb is a political consultant and expert in far-right movements. Welcome to all of you to Inside Story. Michael, let's start with you. Herbert Kickle seems likely, I think you'll agree, to become the next Chancellor of Austria. He has the best chance of forming a coalition. It's his job now to form a coalition with the Conservatives. A couple of things for viewers to know about him. He runs the FPO, a party which is founded by former Nazis back in the 1950s. And he's referred to himself as Volkschancellor, the People's Chancellor, which is also how Hitler was addressed and referred to at times. Beyond that, who is he and what are his political beliefs?
First, Thanks for having me, and hello from Vienna. Yeah, basically, you mentioned it. The Freedom Party was founded by Nazis in the 1950s. By the way, I wouldn't say former Nazis, because being a former Nazi would mean that you really changed your ideology. But basically, what happened is in 1945, the National Socialist Party was forbidden. But these people stayed strong with their beliefs. And they then formed a new party, and that was the Freedom Party, the FPÖ. And so this party is entirely ideologically built within a right-wing extremist framework and far-right framework, and that's where Herbert Kickle is coming from. Herbert Kickle is so he's somebody who is really deeply rooted in the party. He was the long-term organizational secretary. He was in parliament for the FPÖ for a very long time, and now he became the leader of the party. It seems that he is a little less erratic than some of the other party leaders the FPÖ had before, which one of them, Heinz Christian Strache, he blew himself up in a big scandal, the so-called Ibiza scandal, and he seems more clearly dedicated to the cause. He seems very ideological, and now we will see what we will get. But what is sure, I think we will come to that later on, is that what we will see now probably are really hard social cuts against the big majority of the population.
Florian, what is the policy on immigration? He calls it, Herbert Kickle calls it Fortress Austria. That's the umbrella term for his vision for Austria. What is Fortress Austria?
Yeah, the question is generally how we are dealing with the migration topic, because we are in the age to talk about national states. As the European Union, we have also the pressure of the migration within the European countries. We have also the question of how to deal with the political Islam, and this is very toxic, generally, how to deal with these challenges.
What are the policies, what are the main policies that he sold during the campaign on immigration?
No, it's about the fear, because people are seeing the changes in the societies, in the European societies. I'm from Germany. We see that actually migration is a big issue. We see also the terrorism as a big issue. We had one almost successful attack in Vienna with the Taylor Swift concert. We also had different terrorist attacks in Germany this year, and this is why people are afraid of the future.
Michael, my understanding is he had pretty specific policies, which were pausing asylum seekers from entering the country and banning asylum seekers from ever becoming citizens.
Yeah, that's true. Basically, what the Freedom Party does is they try to set up people with a migration biography, asylum seekers as scapegoats, and we've seen that when the FPÖ entered the government last time between 2017 and 2019, what they do is, in the general public, they talk about asylum seekers, they talk about migrants, and with that argument, they then put forward social cuts. But those social cuts then affect the entire population. So basically what they are doing is scapegoating with migrants to build for strong social cuts against the majority of the population.
Aurelien, you're a senior lecturer. You research extremism and racism in Europe. Where would you place the FPO in this galaxy that you study, on this sliding scale of racism and extremism? Where are they on that scale, or should they not be put on that scale?
Well, I think thinking in terms of scales is always a bit problematic, right? Because I think it's not necessarily a spectrum that we are looking at. I think it's something that is much more lively than this. And I think, there has been a tendency in recent years and decades, in many ways, to look at the far right or the extreme right, whatever we want to call it, in exceptionalizing terms, where we see them as kind of like the boogeyman in a way, and where we see them as like the the epitome of bad politics. But I think what I've been looking at and what I've tried to argue in my research is that we also need to look at the role of mainstream actors and the way mainstream actors, whether we want to call them centrist, moderate, liberal, whatever, the way these actors have helped normalize this politics. And the reason why we have the FPÖ, like as you said, a party that was founded by Nazis, advocates of power today. And of course, it's a party that has changed over the years, right? It's not the same party today than it was in the 1950s, but it's still very much a far-right, extreme-right party by most definitions. Now that we have a party like this advocates of power, but we have also similar parties advocates of power in other countries in Europe and in other places in the world, or in power even, I think tells us a lot about how they've been allowed to come back to the mainstream of politics. This would have been incredible to think about these kind of things like 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, when the FPÖ first kind of started to rise again in the 1990s with Jörg Haider. At the same time as the Front National in France under Jean-Marie Le Pen, they were still seen as boogeymen. And now they are accepted by mainstream actors, by mainstream parties, and potentially brought into coalitions. And I think this is deeply worrying. And I think we always
Aurelien,
need to think about the role of mainstream actors.
Can I jump in? I thought we'd discuss this a little later, but since you bring this up now, I do want to understand what this is. You've written about this, the mainstreaming of the extreme right by the elites, okay? Politicians, academics, and the media. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's absolutely core. And it's something that we tend to leave towards the end of this kind of debate, so towards the end of academic articles, or towards the end of newspaper articles and so on. But I think if we want to understand the resurgence of far-right politics, of racism, of fascism even, I think we really need to think about who has power to set the agenda, who has power to frame public debate. And this power is not necessarily in the hands of far-right actors or extreme-right actors. This power is in the hands of mainstream actors, whether it is the mainstream media, including the broadsheets, liberal media, whether it is mainstream politicians from the center left, the center right, and so on. These people have opened the doors to far-right politics by tapping into the so-called by, for example, putting the immigration issue front and center. What I've looked at in my research is that actually, people are only concerned about immigration when they think about their country, when they think about their day-to-day lives. Immigration is not a concern of theirs. And I think we need to question these ideas. How is public opinion formed? People don't answer opinion polls, don't go to vote in a vacuum. They have ideas that have been shared by the media, by people around them, it used to be by religious institutions, by workplaces, and so on, that help them form their vision of the world. If everything they hear in public debate is about immigration being bad for their country and a threat to them, they will start thinking that, yes, immigration is a key issue. But actually, when people think about their day-to-day lives, this is not a key issue. The key issue is healthcare. The key issue is taxes. The key issue is education, is pensions. And it's exactly what the other speaker on the panel has said before. The far right has no answer to the many crises that we are facing at the moment. They only have scapegoats.
But in that case, how do you explain that the FPÖ comes?
May I jump in?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Absolutely. Go ahead, Michael.
With one sentence, I totally agree with what you said. And just to make that clear in a maybe more concrete way, I did a research on like the real security situation in Vienna. And what we can see is that the crime rate in Vienna is constantly sinking since years. But when you ask people on the streets, they will tell you that the crime, and especially the link crime, then often to migration, is a very big topic. And we can see in the numbers that's simply not true. But what the FPÖ does, what also some boulevard media do, and what also other parties like the Conservative Party do, is they try to make people feel insecure and then try to gain something out of it. And that's the real problem. So I totally agree.
I mean, if it's working, there must be something there that people feel or believe if they actually go and vote for the parties that make this the main plank of their policy platform, no?
I think, like, of course, in a city like Vienna, for example, of course, you will have some crime. So we are not in outer space. But when we have a look on how it developed over like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, then we can see that it's really going down. But many people often don't remember really good what happened like 10, 20 years ago. But when you see them in the boulevard papers every day, the new headlines, there is crime, there is crime, there is crime, and so on, then the people will get feared. And fear that's what the far right takes their success on.
Florian, I saw you raised your hand a couple of times. Thanks for your patience. What did you want to say?
Yeah, first of all, it's very clear that the exclusion strategy towards the radical right has failed. So there was an option in Austria to build a coalition against the Freedom Party, but it has failed. So we also have to talk about the established political parties, and they are under pressure in our representative democracies in Europe, as we see in Austria and Germany. And unfortunately, we are in this crisis moments that we are seeing unpredicted future. We don't know how it's going further, but it's very tough. As a German, I was used to have two coalition partners. Everything is stable. Now we also have elections in a couple of weeks, and generally the situation is very toxic. Generally, also due to the world disorder in which we are living in.
I think there's one question I have, which is at the intersection of what you've all been saying. We said multiple times this party, the FPO in Austria, was founded by Nazis. This was decades ago, in the 50s, of course. But that is still, those are the roots. That is the origin. And they just secured almost 30%, right? 28.85% in the last election. So close to a third of Austrian voters voted for them over the left, over the Social Democrats, over the Conservatives, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I don't think anyone is saying or thinking that almost a third of Austrian voters are Nazi sympathizers. So how do you square that circle? Florian, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the biggest argument for the far right. First of all, the Freedom Party of Austria was not created as a Nazi party. They also had minority government with the Social Democrats, and it's very easy, like it happened in Germany and Austria, to blame the political parties as Nazis, but it doesn't bring us forward, because we have to deal with these issues.
No, I think it's about trying to understand it. And I know we've spent a long time on this issue, but we're trying to...
Nazi party, we cannot deal with that. It's very difficult.
No, I think what it is certainly from the questions I'm asking is, I think we kind of need to have a strong foundation of understanding where the support is coming from, why people are voting for them. That's what I'm getting at.
I think we need to understand that, but I think there's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, because for many years, the far right has been hyped. Even when the far right doesn't do particularly well, they are the center of attention. You know, for example, I mean, it's quite timely today, as Jean-Marie Le Pen has just passed away. But in 2002 in France, when the Front National really made its first massive breakthrough, when Jean-Marie Le Pen got to the second round of the presidential election, it was splashed all over the news. All over front pages were talking about Jean-Marie Le Pen, about how popular he was, about the earthquake, all of these kind of things. What we totally missed in 2002 by just looking at voting and without looking at abstention, for example, without looking at actually the trends in voting, who was voting and so on, what we totally missed is that Jean-Marie Le Pen in 2002 got no more votes than he got in 1995 or in 1988. Jean-Marie Le Pen in 2002 was stagnating. What happened in 2002, and it's very much similar to what happened in Austria, in the recent elections, but also in other countries around the world where the far right has done well, is that the parties of government are failing to offer an alternative that is decent. And so the only alternative that is constructed is the far right, which appeals to increasingly more people, although it remains a minority of the population. Keep in mind that, for example, there was almost a quarter of Austrian voters who did not turn up in the election. And so the vast majority of Austrians who can vote did not vote for the FPÖ, but they were forced to vote for parties they don't like either. So they are offered an option between the bad and the worst. And the problem is that this option of the bad is less and less appealing. What we need is proper alternatives. But at the moment, we don't have these alternatives, unfortunately. And when we do, like we had, for example, in France in the recent elections, Emmanuel Macron decided to instead side with the right and the far right, rather than to actually give the left a chance. So I think, going back to the mainstreaming of the far right as a result of the actions of mainstream actors, I think that's what we need to look at. The reason the far right is becoming more popular, although in a limited way, is because of the mainstream. It's because of a failure of mainstream actors.
One thing, as I was researching this, I was looking at the polling trends for the last few years of FPO, and it's quite notable. The rise occurs from early 2020. They were very low. They were the fourth party in opinion polls. They were the fourth party in Austria by late 2019, and they did not do particularly well in they were like 12, 13%, forgive me, I don't remember the exact number, in the 2019 legislative election. They were low at the time. And then starting early 2020, to basically the next 4 years, it's an uninterrupted rise, and you see them taking over the left and then the conservatives. And I wondered, is there something that explains the rise starting early 2020 till now, till them becoming the winner and the main party, the first party in Austria? Michael, perhaps this is one for you.
Well, basically they didn't rise. That's the point. The Freedom
Well, they
Party,
doubled their vote numbers. They doubled their vote numbers.
Wait, of course. Of course, yeah, but of course. Basically, the Freedom Party was already at around 30%, 28% in the year 2000. And then they entered the government with the Conservative Party first, and then really they exploded within that. And then in 2007, 2008, they were really small. Then they were rising up again, up to 2016, let's say. They were really strong then. Then they entered the government again with the Freedom Party, and then they exploded again. So what you see in 2019 is a total explosion of the party after a big scandal about corruption, about financial issues. And then what happened is they throw their former leader, Heinz-Christian Strache, out of the party, and then they rebuild again. So basically, since, let's say, 1999, 2000, we have this party with around 25, 28, 30, 32%. In 2016, already at the presidential election, they had 49% of the vote. But then they really exploded in a corruption scandal, and now they are growing up again. But the people were there. And also because it was mentioned before, there is like a running gag in Austria. That running gag is called the so-called single cases, Einzelfälle. That's always said when there is a new Nazi scandal in the FPÖ coming up. So people, because the FPÖ then says, yeah, well, that's just this only case. But there are like hundreds of only cases, Einzelfälle. So we can really see that Austrian Nazis have two choices. They can either go to prison when they are out of the FPÖ, because then there is really some laws which go strong on them, or they can go into the FPÖ and then they will maybe go to parliament. So there is this absolutely far-right core of the party, also with male organizations, the so-called Burschenschaften, students' organizations, fascist students' organizations, and they built the ideological core of the party till today, and people know that. Okay, that's the point. So we should be very clear on that.
We have about 5 minutes left, so I'll ask all of you to keep your answers a little tight so I can hear from all of you on this. I'd like to broaden it out in the last 5 minutes that we have to a more Europe-wide perspective, because you can't miss the fact that the far right is on the rise across the European Union. So today we're talking about Austria, but the far right is in power in the Netherlands. Hungary is the poster boy, obviously, for the far right in Europe. The far right is also a partner in government in Slovakia. What am I missing? Well, Italy, you could argue that Giorgia Meloni has kind of mainstreamed her views, parties, and policies since she came to power. The far right has been on the rise in France, even though they're not in government. So there's a Europe-wide something happening. And my question is, what is that something? Florian, do you want to go first?
Yeah, the problem is actually migration and the fear of economic decline, plus also the issue how we are dealing with the digital society, and generally also how it's going further in Europe. How strong is the European Union who try to be resilient against these tendencies? And this is very toxic and very difficult, and I'm not so pessimistic about the next 5-10 years in this case.
Okay, so you're saying migration, societal questions, economic decline, and also questions about governance in Europe itself. Aurelien?
Yes, and plus... But,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you can finish that. Go ahead.
My students under 40 years are not reading their newspapers anymore. They're going to TikTok, to other platforms. This is also the question of fake news and disinformation, unfortunately.
Okay, tell them to watch Al Jazeera. Aurelien?
Yeah, I would say the issues are much deeper, and I would say that the issues are very much to do with liberal democratic institutions at the moment, which have proved completely unable not only to resist the rise of the far right, but also to offer alternatives to many crises that European countries, but also the world are facing. Whether it be climate change, the rise of inequalities, the COVID crisis, providing no proper response, no proper hope that something better could come up, of course, will breed this kind of toxic politics and this kind of scapegoating that we see on the far right. So rather than the rise of the far right, this is a failure of mainstream politics and of mainstream liberal institutions.
Michael?
Well, I think basically mainly the left and the unions, they are failing to give answers to the social questions that many people have. And I would also mention on migration, migrants are not a problem. People are never a problem. So we should be very clear on that. But also, and that's the last sentence, I think future is unwritten. So it's very unclear what happens. This new government now, if it comes to power, will make hard social cuts on the population. We will see people will stand up, people will go on strike, people will go on the streets, and then we will see how stable that government really is.
Well, to your point about the future being unwritten, I'll squeeze in one last question. Aurelien, I'll throw this one to you. And it may not be possible to answer this question. In fact, it isn't, but I just want your thoughts on it. Do you think this is a high watermark where we are right now for the far right in Europe? This is as strong a showing as we're going to see from the far right in Europe? Or do you think we're only at the beginning of things to come?
Unfortunately, I think that things could get much worse. It doesn't have to be through the election of far-right parties themselves, but it could just be through the implementation of far-right politics by other actors. We could see it, for example, with the people who control our social media, the people who control our media, and so on. And I think much worse can happen, unfortunately. And I think it's very urgent that resistance is put against this.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much to all our guests for joining us today. That's Michael Bonvalot, Aurelien Mondon, and Florian Hartleb. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X and Instagram. Our handle there, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.